A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I, Ankit Agarwal, on behalf of Zycus, would like to welcome you all for today's presentation on a framework to manage tail spend. This webinar is in association with the Hackett Group. Before I move on to introducing the speaker, I'd like to take you through a few housekeeping items. At any given point in time, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat box on the right-hand side corner of your screen. We'll be taking question and answers at the end of the presentation session. Our speaker for today is Nic Walden, who's Senior Advisor, Procurement and P2P Advisory at the Hackett Group. Nic is a Senior Advisor in the Hackett Group's Procurement and P2P Advisory program, where he works continuously with senior executives of the world's leading companies to provide top performance insights, research, and networking. With a broad background in consulting and industry, he spent 15 years working with senior executives to address and overcome challenges to transform procurement and finance organization. This is it from my side. Over to you, Nic.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Welcome everyone to today's webcast on introducing a framework for successfully managing tail spend. So just a few slides as introduction, brief background on the Hackett Group. So we are a strategic operations advisory and consulting firm. We bring our unique world-class performance insights and intellectual capital to help organizations deliver change in the areas of finance, HR, procurement, supply chain, and IT. Today I'll be sharing insights around world-class performance. We have a unique approach to measuring and helping drive world-class performance that is a balanced approach looking at both effectiveness and value as well as cost to serve and efficiency. In terms of our solution portfolio, we operate in 3 service lines. We are the world leader in business benchmarking. Secondly, we have our project-based transformation consulting work. And from the middle column, in terms of membership advisory services, where I sit in the service line that I operate from, we have our recognized subject matter experts who collaborate and share best practice insight with industry executives and leaders to help accelerate their change and transformation journeys. And now on to today's webcast topic. So thank you again for joining us. Let's talk about developing a framework for successfully managing tail spend. I'd like to cover 3 areas with you today. First, start with providing a clear understanding of what we mean by tail spend. There's a number of different definitions. It can be a complicated area, so it's good to start from that perspective. Then I will clarify the benefits achievable, share some specific Hackett insights from different studies that we've run on the topic, the challenges that different organizations face in terms of volume and engaging stakeholders in the technology that needs to be addressed to be successful in this area, and then finish off through introducing and talking through a framework of solutions to manage the spend, specifically looking at architecting an integrated solution, looking at P cards and looking at guided buying solutions. So first off, just to start with some of the insights from a recent Hackett study. We ran this study with a number of large and international organizations. It's a recent poll we completed in the last few months, and it highlights a handful of critical and most important objectives for the purchase-to-pay area in 2016. And you can see from the chart, this handful covers topics like increasing stakeholder satisfaction, continuing to deliver further savings and value from purchase-to-pay and sourcing, improving internal compliance through reducing off-contract or maverick spend. But really interesting, you can see that cost, risk, and working capital featured lower down on the list near the bottom. So I know myself, in speaking with many different procurement executives, that increasingly the topic of tail spend and P2P comes up. We know from experience as sourcing matures, it does become increasingly difficult to continue to deliver year-on-year savings, first, second, third generation sourcing projects and so on. So executives are always on the lookout for additional sources of value. It's also interesting to note that the focus, or the increased focus on tail spend, it's not instead of, but it's in addition to everything else that we're doing as procurement or finance professionals in terms of strengthening our approaches to category and supply management. So it seems from a Hackett perspective, we're all going to be busier in the future. So now I'd like to provide, I'll talk a bit more about what we mean by tail spend. And really as a headline we have here that tail spend is spend that's not actively managed by procurement professionals. And that's a common definition, I guess. It may not be professionally sourced, there may not be a contract in place. On a spend basis, tail spend maybe accounts for about 20% of total spend by value, but at the same time it might represent 80% of spend in terms of the number of suppliers. And that can mean we're talking about thousands or even tens of thousands of suppliers that are involved. So this creates certain challenges in managing in terms of the sheer volume of line items, the number of items, number of different categories and subcategories involved, because it is across all items of spend. And then the biggest challenge of all is finding cost-effective ways to manage the spend. I think it's important to note that tail spend doesn't usually cover direct spend. Spend normally relates to cost of sales, and usually there's much more rigid and robust processes in place. It's more often associated with indirect spend items related to transactions carried out by staff without the involvement of teams across a broad range of categories. And you can see from the example on the page there, we've called out a number of different tail spend items ranging from office supplies, stationery, cleaning supplies, catering, shipping, magazines, and printing. Basically items that are often purchased infrequently or in small quantities from many different suppliers across the organization. And due to this complexity and the high volume, it may be the case there's little supplier leverage and limited category expertise among staff. The end result being potentially lost value, an unproductive or unsatisfied process, especially from the perspective of employees in the business or a requisitioner, and it can leave money left over on the table. So in terms of answering the question, could you have an issue with tail spend today? Well, let's first consider this. So I'm sharing some metrics on the screen that I lifted from Hackett's 2016 Procurement Benchmark Database. And these benchmark numbers represent performance achieved by world-class procurement organizations. And what we mean by that is this is the top 25% of organizations. So it's difficult to get there, and we're comparing their performance against a median organization. So what we see is that for this world-class procurement organization, they actually have 3 times lower the number of indirect suppliers. And this is measured as the number of suppliers per billion of spend. So they may operate with only 2,000 or about 2,700 suppliers, indirect suppliers per billion of indirect spend. So that's significantly lower. And even more telling, that spend is further concentrated. So they'll have the top 3.9% of suppliers by number actually providing 80% of that annual spend. They're also more successful at automating and controlling those transactions, and they're able to report 97% of transactions being carried out with approved suppliers. And then in terms of considering the level of technology enablement, they're able to drive as much as 4.5 times the number of indirect transactions, and that's by a volume basis, through an electronic catalog. So this can mean in reality, 31% of your indirect spend transaction volumes are running through electronic procurements or your catalog systems. So I'll just pause there for a moment and let you reflect how you might compare against this checklist of benchmark metrics today. So just moving on, another Hackett insight here. We recently ran a specific study that looked at the savings or the benefit being derived by organizations. So this is actual savings by those who were more actively managing tail spend. And again, this is large international and global organizations, typically those with about more than $1 billion US or pounds or euros in terms of third-party spend. We asked them different questions about the practices that they were adopting and what they were able to achieve from delivering the spend. In the organizations we polled, they told us that on average they achieved about 7% savings in terms of spend reduction. And we thought that was a pretty good number. And if you compare that to an overall average saving from usual strategic sourcing savings, you're probably looking at about a 5 or 6% number. So this 7%, which is an additional 7% in terms of savings, can appear attractive and a useful value contribution, and it helps explain why heads of procurement, CPOs are more interested in this topic. So the graphic that I'm showing here on the page shows the percentage of poll respondents by achieved savings band. So the savings bracket that the different organizations reported is at the bottom of the page, and you can see the blue bands represent the population or the percentage of organizations fitting in each one. So the biggest band on the page there, the 42%, says that a majority of organizations they reported they achieved between 0 and 5% savings from improving their spend management practices. But when we dive deeper into the data, unexpectedly we saw that 30% of those organizations were reporting much higher levels of savings, above 10%, even some reporting as greater than 20% savings. So we dive deeper into the data to answer the question, well, what could be driving this? And we pulled out a couple of case studies or interesting insights. And really the root cause or the real driver for why organizations were reporting savings at the high end of the scale, this is largely driven by wrongly classified spend. So for example, we had cases where one-off and infrequent spend items turned out to actually be recurring spend on a global and organization-wide basis. And then in a second example, there was a significant part of tail-end spend included maverick buying. So in both these cases, if you could address it and improve management of the tail, then it's the case that this sort of spend should have been sourced strategically in the first place and hopefully look to deliver this much higher level of spend savings. But without the influence of misclassified spend, it's likely a more realistic savings target or spend savings target from tail-end spend management, somewhere likely in the region of about 3 to 5%. And of course, there's going to be additional savings from improved and streamlined processes. So I'd now like to start the first of our online polls. And we'll take a few minutes to collect and reflect on the benefits that you as the audience expect from addressing spend in this area. The questions are multi-choice, so select the benefit you rate as most important from improving management in this area. Hopefully the poll works okay and you're able to select more than one answer. But we have at the bottom there, there's an option G there, select all of the above. So basically we just ask you to select from that list of options in the polling tab, which are the benefits you expect to or see as most important. And they range from looking at spend savings or spend saving reduction, through to process efficiency, improving compliance, driving visibility into spend, improving satisfaction, stakeholder satisfaction, perhaps through shortening cycle times and through accelerated sourcing responses, or just enabling people to get their goods and services quicker. So the poll's going to run for 2 minutes, and we're just over the minute there, so we'll just leave it open for a little bit longer, about just over 30 seconds for the last few people to select their particular answers. Just to run through those options again, option A is around, most important being savings through spend reduction. We also have process efficiency, compliance, spend visibility, extending spend under management, stakeholder satisfaction, and all of the above. So we've ended the poll and the results are up. So we can see on the page here, in the polling results panel from the people that we have on the webcast today, just over 31% of attendees are saying that for them, the most important benefit from improving tail spend management is savings through spend reduction. Well, that shouldn't be a surprise. And then, interestingly, it wasn't a trick question, but we have another third of folks on the webcast saying that actually they take a broader view and they expect not only spend savings reduction, but also the different benefits in terms of a streamlined process, improved risk management, satisfaction, and compliance. And I think if we reflect back in terms of my perspective, we do start to see organizations move to this broader view of what they're expecting from focusing on this area. One of the first slides that I had up was the results from one of our key issue study, and it had there some broader insights about the broader focus from driving value in this area as being one of the top 1, 2, or 3 priorities. So this is really interesting insights, and I think it's broadly aligned with what we see across the market. So it's an encouraging development. So thank you, everyone. So move on to the next section. Maybe just say a few other words about some of the other savings benefits that we do see. Increased process efficiency and quality. Moving to a more standardized process model can help to reduce the number of smaller one-off vendors. I think there's something also interesting to note about using tail spend management to help with diversity or SME objectives. I think responsible sourcing, ethical behaviors are an increasingly important topic, especially to the new millennial generation. So using tail spend management appropriately to also help achieve green or minority objectives is quite key. Manage risk. And then overall, we're looking to free up time across the organization in your category and sourcing teams, but also across the business of people, just make it as easy as possible for people to get the goods and services that they need to carry out their day-to-day jobs. If I jump forward, here we're looking in this slide, it's more of the characteristics and reasons for tail spend. Just like to look at this profile of the tail, run through some of the challenges faced and different options to address. So the graphic on the page, I think, is a really useful and interesting way to chunk up and look at the profile for tail spend. It breaks it into 4 sections, really. First section we're calling shadow tail, the second being tail head, tail body, and ending with the tail tip. And the graphic, interestingly, also shows the different level and types of benefit, either spend or process related, that are delivered from each different component. And we do see the tail head opportunities there being more price saving focused. But then as you drop down the curve, as the value of spend by the supplier drops away, it gets to the point closer to the right where it's the case that the tail tip needs to be delivering more in terms of a more efficient and productive process. So if I start first by just introducing and saying a few words about shadow tail. So this is spend that's not strategically sourced. And in the diagram, we're talking about that small lighter blue curve. That's above the darker blue curve. The darker blue chunk represents the managed spend section. So that's traditionally sourced and handled, contracted by your strategic sourcing teams. So this shadow tail section may be maverick spend with larger suppliers, but it's not covered by contracts for different reasons. Perhaps the existing contracts don't cover specific material or service being purchased, maybe one-off spend, or truly non-compliant or maverick purchasing, right? So common responses in this case may be to consider accelerated sourcing approaches, working in the sourcing teams to perhaps extend their level of commodity understanding and knowledge of the marketplace, really helping them to achieve the goal of earlier involvement from a sourcing perspective. So the second segment in the profile concerns tailhead spend. And this is spend that's still not managed by procurement, even though the spend, if you look at it on a supplier by supplier basis, may still be relatively high. So tactics in addressing this segment might focus on improving the general visibility of spend, so procurement tools, requisition tools, and so on, for potential sourcing consolidation, really looking to more accurately classify and address any misclassification of spend, and increasingly using the purchase-to-pay process to improve compliance and drive compliance. So the adoption of purchase orders, reduce retrospective purchase orders, look at measurement, reporting, driving compliance that way, and so on. The third segment looks at the tail body, and this covers the middle section of the tail, spend that's not strategically managed, because in this case, the spend per supplier is just getting too small. I find time pressures for the team or sourcing team to respond and find cost-effective approaches to source are some of the challenges and root causes of the issue here. So when we're looking for solutions, we're really looking to consider the use of more automated and self-service tools, and perhaps central consolidation for later sourcing, so buying desk and catalogs and so on. The fourth segment, in terms of the tail tip, I mean, this is truly your tail spend, right? It's basic tail spend here. This segment has the greatest challenge, the greatest volume of suppliers with the lowest levels of spend. Spend here is going to be highly transactional and fragmented in nature. This is really going to involve a high number of one-off purchases with a large number of suppliers. So now that we have that understanding of the breakup and the composition of what's in tail spend and some of the solutions as an introduction, I'd just like to talk about seven common challenges to addressing tail spend and improving better management. Some of these can include a lack of visibility into purchases in the tail, and that makes it difficult to manage effectively. If you don't have visibility, the spend there's no purchase order being raised, invoice just comes in late, there's no requisitions and whatnot, quality of the data that you have, these are some of the challenges that you need to address here. Tail spend fatigue, so just considering the effort to address this high volume of low value transactions in terms of analyzing and considering what are the root causes of the tail spend. It's a big effort, an ongoing effort to look to address this, and this does take time, effort, and energy, and it's not everyone's priority today. That brings me on to the third point about having cost-effective resources available to look at this. One of the common challenges or reasons why it's largely or more unmanaged today is that the guys and girls in the category and sourcing teams, they just don't have the time, dedication to look at this area. The cost of the people involved, it might just not make sense in terms of the ROI, the value that they're able to deliver versus, the cost to serve and so on. So there's something there about thinking about the way that we respond to this in terms of the people that we use, the use of technology, perhaps are thinking about, central sourcing teams or even offshore sourcing teams in low-cost environments to help achieve some of the cost-effective objectives here. The fourth point, in terms of different stakeholders affected in different ways by tail spend issues. When you get out there and you speak to the business and you ask them, well, what do they want from purchasing or procurement organization, or what do they want from a P2P process? Some of the responses will differ. Some of them will say, I just want to be able to buy what I want. Some of them will be more focused around risks. Some of them will be more focused on cycle times and so on. So you do get different stakeholder results there and perspectives. It can be complicated in terms of meeting the different expectations and objectives there. Point number 5 in terms of considering the change here, right? Where in terms of delivering the solution, we need to look to manage different consumption and demand management policies more appropriately. We need to perhaps upgrade and streamline our P2P processes and really get quite good at some of the advanced capabilities here. And of course, we're going to need investment, perhaps the IT team, certainly some new technologies and some new approaches to help deliver that. So that's going to take skills, expertise, as well as a business case. Number 6, I think I touched on this one, but I think a key point here in terms of expectations is just to call out, cycle times or speed to source or customer satisfaction being key and interesting areas here. And the last one, is just quite simple, right? For this level of spend, the tail spend, if it only represents 20% of our spend, but it's a high number of suppliers, and on average, the supply or the spend per supplier is low, that some stakeholders, they're just not interested in addressing this, right? From procurement, they might be more focused around direct spend, or indirect spend might not be fully or only partly managed today. So from a business perspective, they might be fine with that. This level of spend or this level of change and driving the right level of behaviors and expectations across the business, it might not just be there yet. So if I jump through to the next slide, so we've run through the benefits, we've run through the challenges, we've run through definition for tail spend. Now I'd like to introduce this third section of the webcast today, to introduce a framework to manage tail spend. So in a nutshell, we're drawing out 3 key steps. And this initially might start as a 3-month project, maybe as long as a 6-month project, to analyze, classifying tail end spend. Here we're thinking about developing that classic spend profile, assessing the different processes that you have in place for contracting, the policy, especially for P2P, how you're enabling people to buy across the organization, use of purchase orders and so on, P cards and the rest. And then thinking about identifying, well, what could be some of the opportunities and solutions based on the gaps that we pulled out from that analysis. And then if we're thinking about driving change and it's going to need investments and new ways of working, tools and so on, for sure we're going to need to draw up a business case with cost-benefit analysis. And that will allow us to accurately propose different solutions. But let's first consider that first step there, analyzing and classifying tail end spend in a bit more detail. So here we're doing the typical spend analysis, looking at identifying tail spend, perhaps on a category-by-category basis. We do some of the heavy lifting involved in terms of systematically cleansing and classifying spend transaction information. We want to achieve the goal to really improve our picture, our view of spend in the tail. So what we're buying from who, how it's happening, and so on. So the analyst and project team have to spend some time classifying and filtering the data, correcting transaction supplier data, names, addresses, item, contract data, and so on. Really looking to fix and clean up any duplicates in the data, correct any obvious errors and so on. So that will certainly take some time. Second key step, once we've done the analysis and classification, is to think about identifying and implementing appropriate strategies to manage the spend, right? So basically we want to take our spend analysis, We want to classify spend by each of the 4 different tail spend segments from shadow, head, body, and tip, because you're going to need to look to identify an appropriate strategy to manage those different types of spend, right? They have different challenges, different reasons, different root causes, and different solutions. And that might also vary across different stakeholders or the specific reasons for why it is tail spend, especially when you're thinking about the shadow and head spend there. And remember, when we're considering appropriate strategies, solutions, it's important to keep in mind to deliver benefit, we're really looking for 3 things. We want to consolidate spend further, we want to make it more visible, and we want to make it easier to transact. So I'll cover specific strategies and different topics and solutions in a bit more detail in a minute, but I just want to finish on point number 3 here around tracking and compliance. So this 3rd step really involves measuring and reporting. So we can be tracking performance, sharing scorecard performance and metrics, different metrics that we might want to be report to different stakeholders and leaders in the business in terms of driving the right behaviors. It can be things like the number of suppliers, number of approved suppliers, spend on e-catalogs, cycle time for sourcing, the different types of sourcing that we have there, compliance to preferred buying channels, because we want to be tracking our value contribution, progress against the business case, and so on. So if we come back to talking a bit more about the different solutions, we start first with thinking about how we reclassify or consolidate spend. So here we're thinking about reassigning tail spend, matching it up to existing contracts for later consolidation or inclusion, potential sourcing, and so on. But shadow or tail spend in this solution, we're really looking for spend with significant savings or growth opportunity that we can strategically source, both using traditional sourcing levers, but also perhaps specific commodity-specific levers as well. So, products or services that aren't included in global contracts are an obvious addition. So things like things that are going to be managed on a global spend basis will be relevant there. Second solution can be around setting up tactical spend buying desks, and this can be where requisitions and sourcing requests that are routed to a team of semi-professional buyers, and they look to consolidate and enforce purchasing controls. So they'll use governance mechanisms like category cards as a useful tool for the buying desk team, as guidance to execute appropriate strategies, category strategies, who to buy from, who are the typical buyers, different locations across the business, and so on. But also to deliver savings in a cost-effective way, this buying desk team, they can utilize accelerated sourcing approaches, technology tools including e-sourcing, e-auctions, even business-to-business marketplaces. The goal here is to deliver this additional value in a cost-effective way, but bearing in mind, it'll be lower spend items and tactical spend items that are perhaps bought uncommonly or even on an emergency basis, so they need a really quick and rapid response to meet stakeholder expectations, or they might be bought on a one-off basis, right? So the consolidation opportunities across the organization just aren't there. Third solution can be spot buying. Spot buying, here we're talking about making one-time purchases of goods, non-negotiated, non-contracted prices, and this can cover anything where we're not using a buying desk or a catalog. That brings me to, I think it's a 4th option here, around solutions involving e-catalogs or guided buying approaches. So in this solution, we're thinking about how we use online and self-service solutions to better enable requisitioners to as easily as possible buy what they need from preferred suppliers. They can be underpinned with contracts and prices. This is all delivered through that Amazon-like buying experience. So here we're using electronic catalogs to perhaps search for and buy indirect goods. There may also be in-house maintained catalogs. Might be your traditional punch-outs maintained by third-party vendors. May even be aggregator and consolidation tools and opportunities here. And increasingly, as one of the leading trends, the use of business-to-business marketplaces. And here suppliers are maintaining catalogs on the marketplace, and then with the user experience and localization being front of mind, these suppliers, even though there's no contract in place, can still offer you perhaps personalized pricing or dynamic pricing end of the month or whatnot, end of the quarter on items, so you can still drive further value that way. Another solution, classic opportunity, is the use of P cards. It's always a popular topic to think about improving or utilizing P card programs. So really, as part of a broader process to look at your P2P process, review the use of how we're using 2- and 3-way matches to identify commodities, suppliers for buying and settlement, really through the use of a P card program, right? So we want to get rid of the need for perhaps a purchase order, but certainly an invoice. So benefits here are, reducing and eliminating those invoices, reducing transaction cost, and to a certain degree, capturing the use of rebates through putting spend through the program provider cards. And this solution is specifically useful for really looking at that lower end of tail spend, the tail tip and so on. But interestingly, some organizations we work with and speak to, they will set a limit for some P cards, for some, perhaps for teams or departments and whatnot. Instead of the typical one being around $2,000 or $2,500, they may set it as high as $50,000 for specific commodities or categories of spend, right? The idea being, they've taken a view on risk and control and value and decided that actually P card is going to give us the best bang for buck there. So other initiatives that are able to be considered as part of a framework to manage tail spend, they can include mapping specifications to existing stock keeping units, putting in place measures to improve or reduce spend avoidance, even perhaps using a managed service provider to manage the tail spend, or even outsourcing to a third-party BPO firm. So in terms of a managed service, that could include things like a purchasing consortium. It could include even a spend aggregator. So I'd now like to turn to the second of our audience polls, and that really looks to consider or ask for your feedback on which solutions and tactics are you adopting or consider to adopt today. You're earlier on in your tail spend journey, what would be the biggest tactics, the most obvious tactics you would think as being appropriate. So what are you using if you're further down the road, or if you're still starting out? What would you consider to put in place earlier in your timetable? So this might be things like reclassifying tail spend to include them in existing contracts and sourcing and so on, putting in place the buying desk for tactical spend, spot buying tools, maybe even spot buying desk as an example, really looking to drive some value from those one-off or those one-time buys. The use of electronic catalogs and different types there, from stuff that you have a catalog content team to maintain in-house, and then you're continually looking to update and add to. You may have your punch-outs and use of third-party catalogs. May even be those business-to-business marketplaces, the Alibabas, the Amazon business, the eBays, And increasingly, the different technology providers are looking to tie up with different marketplace vendors as well there. P-cards as a fifth option, option E there. So mapping, number 6, mapping specifications to different stock keeping units and items, and initiatives to reduce maverick spend. So similar to the last one, I've also put in an option here to say, you know, well, if you're doing all of it, then you can certainly select option 8 here, all of the above. We set ourselves a little bit longer in terms of time to consider the answers to this one. We set ourselves about 5 minutes in total. We're just over 3 minutes of the way through. But it seems we've closed the poll. We have the results. So based on the feedback, it's a bit of a mixture of feedback here. The largest response is actually no answer, even though we've given this 3 minutes. But let's see, what else have we got here? I think, is that 7%? 7%. So, you know, a chunk of people are certainly reclassifying spends. They're doing the spend analysis and looking at opportunities to reclassify spend match it against contracts, or make sure it appears in spend analysis the right way. Another chunk, so I think that's 7%, have a buying desk in place for tactical spend. There's another chunk, a bit more people, so about 12% have catalogs deployed, and they're similar, are using P-cards. But I think generally, as a result, usage of some of these practices that from a Hackett, from a best practice perspective, we would certainly expect to see their utilization or existence a bit higher, based on my experience. Many of the organizations that we'll talk with, they will certainly be investing in or deploying their buying desk, you know, tactical buying desk, spot buying desk, and so on. They will be a lot further along in terms of the deployment of the different types of catalogs, in terms of capturing, managing spend. So really interesting. I think it ties in well in terms of the topic that we wanted to talk about today. You know, putting in place a framework for successfully managing spend. We've talked a little bit about benefit opportunity, which might be as high as 7%. And based on the folks that we have today on the webcast, it does seem like there's a big opportunity, or there's still a big opportunity for organizations to work in this area a bit more. Okay, so if I move on to the next slide here, we're starting to wind down as we get closer to the top of the hour, so we've still got a few minutes to go, just 1 or 2 slides just to run through. But this slide here, I just want to talk about as a couple of the success factors, and go into some more information on guided buying, P-cards, and so on, just to touch a bit more on the success factors in terms of enabling your framework to managing tail spend. But each of these different solutions that I've just run through, from buying desk, spot buying, catalogs, P-cards, and the rest, they shouldn't be considered separately, right? It makes sense that when you're putting together your strategy, considering technology and process in terms of how you enable this, think about it as part of an integrated framework to manage spend better across the organization. And the example that we have on the page here, this is an example for an organization that's influencing about 55%, so just over half of their indirect spend today. And of that 55%, they've got about 40% that's actually sourced by professional sourcing teams. So maybe that's IT and telecoms, maybe that's travel, maybe that's fleet, maybe it's general business, and so on. But there's some key emissions there, right? So they're only tapping into about 40% of that. And they've certainly got some challenges around extending that influence and better capturing tail spend across the organization. So in this case, when they ran their spend analysis, they discovered that we've got another 10% of our spend that's actually maverick, that potentially should have been strategically sourced. So they're looking at ways that they can extend the influence of their traditional procurement-based strategic sourcing teams. So either upskilling, extending their role, perhaps the softer skills across the team, so that they can get an earlier involvement, greater exposure with their key business stakeholders. Then in terms of their solution framework, they thought about putting in place this tactical buying desk. They thought about deploying e-procurement, modules and tools, and resourcing catalog content teams. So it's not just a case of putting the technology in place. The next challenge then becomes, need to make sure you've got the right content, and that content is being updated regularly in terms of quality and improving, taking advantage of different opportunities to further extend utilization and update across the organization. So this tactical buying desk that they've put in place, it acted to solicit bids, even conduct professional negotiations, select backed offers for tactical spot buy, and really they're looking to influence and capture spend here that before was being made locally, and there was no bidding involved, right? So there was money left on the table, but a bit of savings lost. When they rolled out their e-catalogs, their electronic requisitioning, visibility into POs and so on, this allowed their end users, requisitioners in the business, to create requisitions and self-source items from catalogs, eventually turned into orders, or even stuff that wasn't in the catalog, raised as a free text requisition. And then, of course, with some automation on top of the tools, each of those requisitions, and certainly the free text requisitions, would be directed to that buying desk team, and they act as a triage desk, right? They determine the appropriate treatment or demand management or compliance management or whatnot to respond the right way, to perhaps match that sourcing or requisition request to an existing contract, preferred supplier, and so on. Or even if it was a sourcing request or a requisition request that came in for an item that's more appropriate over a threshold or a certain profile of spend or whatnot, to pass that into one of the category teams so that they can source that on a strategic basis and so on. Okay, so if I jump forward, one of the trends or success factors that I wanted to touch on was related to this Amazon-like buying experience, e-procurement, or the guided buying approach. So, following on from having an integrated framework, I think a second key success factor is to consider improving the customer experience in terms of technology tools and buying support. So we see that from our benchmarks, that top performing organizations are those that are much more effective at achieving their objectives, their saving objectives, their tail spend objectives, through driving requisitions to the preferred buying channels. So that's looking at different acquisitions, different commodities, making sure that it's matched up to the right supplier, the right price, the right buying method, and so on. And the tactical buying desk, they had this great opportunity to play this triage role alongside some automation to manage this on a cost-effective basis, but to make sure that the purchasing policies are streamlined and effectively marketed, and they're understandable by people out there in the organization, even occasional requisitions, right? So if you're only doing this once or twice a year or once or twice a month or whatnot, then it can be quite difficult to find what you want and make sure that you follow it the right way. Because stakeholders in the business, remember, they're thinking, they have a totally different perspective on what they want to achieve, right? They just want their goods and services. They're less focused on doing it the right way and delivering savings and so on. So again, the focus on user experience and enabling this Amazon-like buying experience is a key consideration. And if you think about the technology, the tools, the process, and how you help achieve that outcome, making sure that your preferred items and suppliers, with contracts and so on, are highlighted. So when people search, those suppliers or those items that come to the list, they're starred, or it's obvious that you should really be thinking about buying this first. So it's much more visible. But then if I need help and assistance for how I buy something or how I go about something, then I can easily contact, perhaps through a chat button, in terms of messaging, or a phone number I can call, and I can reach out to some experts who can help me. This might be, again, your buying desk, and they can provide support or assistance as needed. So you can see, in terms of this integrated framework, this tactical buying desk, it does play a valuable role supporting and guiding requisitioners alongside the technology in the different ways that it plugs into the organization. In terms of also spot buying tools, so utilizing technology to address the challenge of spot buying, and this can account for a certain chunk of spend. So an increasing trend here is the use of new technologies for spot buying. This may be either request for goods or services handled by buying desk or even self-service for people needing to buy goods and services out in the organization. And ordinarily, you may spend some time and effort trying to find who you want to buy from, select it, and so on. So the idea here is that spot buy tools and B2B commerce networks, you see some of them listed on the right-hand side there, Alibaba, Amazon Business, eBay. They're basically providing these marketplaces where people in the organization can go to and they can find what they want. But the business versions of these, or the marketplace versions of these, are these tools, but they're also added alongside configurable business rules. So it allows you to configure the different types of commodities or items or content that requisitioners can see and use. So it's certainly a useful tool for helping achieve, this rapid or self-service sourcing, or for an additional tool to arm your tactical buying desk. Really, it's still early days for these tools. We see organizations simply still piloting, still some concern about letting requisitioners loose to use these tools. But really the goal needs to be, ticking that box in terms of we want to be able to respond quicker and easier, and at the same time get some increased visibility into what it is that we're buying across the organization. Now, the last topic, in terms of a success factor, or a topic to dive into in a bit more detail in terms of the solution framework, is on P-cards. And after this slide, we're going to open up for some questions and answers. So if there's some questions that you have in mind that you'd just like to cover in the last few minutes before we wrap up, I'm happy to cover them before we finish up. So just a reminder there. There should be a chat box, Q&A section on the right-hand side of the page there, where you can raise a few questions to us. But yeah, to consider purchasing cards, they continue to be a hot topic. They're still interesting, or they remain interesting, as they offer significant efficiency gains or process efficiency gains relative to other more perhaps invoice-based processes. Right, so you can see there in the slide, and some of the Hackett benchmarks, the traditional three-way match process, invoice, purchase order, and receipt. The cost to process that from a P2P perspective may be as much as 6 times higher than that of handling that same purchase approval and settlement transaction using a P card. So again, from our purchase to pay performance study that we ran in 2015, we saw, based on the data there, that the cost to process that transaction using a P card can be as low as 60 cents a line item, right? So that's a considerable advantage over other approaches, and that makes it quite attractive. Okay, that takes me to the end of today's presentation and what I wanted to cover. Got a couple of questions here. Tail spend looks like in terms of indirect goods. What is in the 80%? Is this the 80% by volume? I think I covered this earlier in the presentation. If I skip back, let me see, from the example that we have, based on the analysis here, we were looking at a different raft of categories. I think in terms of insight, we see that indirect goods is pretty much almost every single category and commodity of indirect goods across the board. And it's going to range from things like indirect packaging, MRO, cleaning, perhaps some small miscellaneous IT and computer-related items, office supplies, gifts and flowers, newspapers and magazines. This is all of the items that are often just buried in terms of one of those GL account codes and a bit of a struggle to track into. And then I missed that question about selecting multiple choices, but that's just one of the challenges that we had when we set up the quick poll today. P-card utilization like in the UK, and how does it compare to the US? So we certainly see that the US, the UK, and Canada are three of the higher penetration geographies, right? Very popular in North America, the US, and Canada. Probably in the US, we see about 80% of organizations with a P-card program in place there. When we consider the UK, it drops down maybe to about a third or 40% of organizations there, and then drops away further when you get further into Western and Central Europe. We recently ran a study on this topic. We do have this poll information available. We produced it in terms of our P-card program guide, in terms of different tools helping to drive adoption and utilization. But a few thoughts in terms of understanding the reasons why this topic struggles a bit more, especially in Europe. I think organizations have been focused on being more digital, driving their automation agendas. For a leading or an organization that's pretty successful with P-cards, they may be able to get as much as 10% of their indirect spend or indirect spend line items into that program, right? If you're thinking about e-invoicing or e-procurement, deploying requisitions and catalogs, the business case can just be that much bigger, that much more attractive, and so the focus goes there for us. I think procurement has a role when they're thinking about their category strategies, their sourcing strategies, to identify suppliers for adoption and help roll that out as part of the selection and contracting process. There's been recent regulatory changes in the EU market regarding the movement to individual bill, company pay, and around merchant fees in this area, right? So that's also one of these options. I think, just as a last point there, there's probably still a perspective that P-cards are perceived as a higher risk and lower control settlement and buying mechanism. And I think if you set your P-card program up right from the start, and with new developments in terms of technology, I think actually the opposite can be true there. Some other questions just before we wrap up. How do you control P-card purchases to ensure people are paying negotiated market price versus list price? If you have negotiated prices versus list price, I think one of the great opportunities there is to link your P-cards in terms of giving them to a team or giving them to a department, or even a ghost card, a V-card, and plugging that into your e-procurement system. So if you have negotiated a price for an item that's in a catalog, you validate, you make sure there are the right prices in the catalog, and then if your settlement mechanism is a P-card, then that's a great way to making sure that you're getting the benefit there. Best practices from the oil and gas industry in terms of SAP ERP, in terms of guided buying from the right supplier. I think we certainly have a whole raft of best practices and tools here. I think you do need to consider the different technology and tools that you have in place. Not all technologies are the same. Those who are more cloud-based or have recently released upgrades in terms of their system will be more customer-focused. Their design teams have really started to focus more on the user experience, the localization, the way they've designed and some of the features. They've listened to what Hackett is saying as part of their best practices. We've worked with their teams, and they've updated their tools and technology. If you're still on, tool and technology from a couple of iterations ago, then you'll be lagging there. Customer experience. Again, I mentioned the buying desk, tactical buying tools. There's a whole raft of things that you can do there. So if that was your question, my contact information, I'm just about to put it up. If you want to drop me an email, I'm happy to have another conversation about that topic.